My name is Nori. I'm a country manager for Japan at AppLovin. And today, as he mentioned, we'd like to talk about the data sharing. And the reason we chose this topic is because we see a big difference between Western developers and Asian developers. Western developers, they share lots of data as long as it makes sense for them to run the campaign effectively and efficiently. But we see like Asian developers, they tend to have more hesitation to share the data. So we'd like to talk about the benefit of the data sharing today.
Yeah, focusing on mobile attribution as well as mobile analytics. So basically through Adjust, you can in-depth analyze your campaigns, figure out where users are coming from, what your highest LTV users, what they're doing inside your app. So the main goal is to take data and turn it into revenue for you.
So hello everybody, I'm Yolanda from Wi-Fi Master Key. So we are running a utility app which is cross-sourcing Wi-Fi accesses, and it's basically a Wi-Fi sharing platform. Imagine a restaurant owner or cafe owner, they're sharing the Wi-Fi out, and anybody with our app installed can get connected for free with our app. So we wish to help people, the unconnected people, get connected, and we wish to build, a community that contribute to the ecosystem of the mobile internet industry as well.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Chase Freo. I'm from R2 Games. R2 Games is an international publisher of mobile games and browser games. We're based in Shenzhen, China. But essentially, what we're doing right now is basically interfacing with a lot of different developers in terms of potential games that we could publish, not just in China, but also outside of China. So most of our games runs from between casual to a lot of like mid-core to even hardcore RPG games. And quite lately, we've been doing a lot of idle RPG games as well. So in terms of our coverage, it's pretty much global, and we're more than happy to work with anyone who has a game that's developed or who has a game that's already in the development process. So hopefully you find this talk today very insightful in terms of the user acquisition side of things as well.
Thank you. So let's start with Shawn. As a tracking platformer, do you see a difference between Western developers and Asian developers in terms of data sharing, how they handle the data?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think obviously it's very difficult to say Asian developers have certain characteristics. Because obviously Singapore is different from the rest of Southeast Asia, which is different from Korea, different from Japan, different from China. Though I guess to take a few themes, one of the big ones is probably the use of agencies. So Singapore, I think agencies are used a fair bit. Korea as well, China a little bit less, and Japan, hugely, probably 80–85% or more of traffic is run through agencies. So basically, if you're using an agency or not, is going to really, that's really going to affect sort of what the data sharing culture is like in that company. So for instance, a lot of companies, use Japan as an example, will actually not even look at dashboards like Adjust. They'll actually go through the agency, and the agency will run those campaigns for them, put together reports, and give it back to the developer. So in that case, the company's going to be very comfortable sharing all of their data, say, with the agency. And for companies coming into those markets, it's going to be to your benefit probably to work with agencies first to really, understand the user characteristics and sort of what networks are going to have the best performance for you. I think another thing is definitely like the siloing. See sometimes between the tech team, the business operations team, and the marketing side. So for analytics, there's a tech stack. So figuring out, where users are coming from, that's the attribution side. But then obviously post-install, sort of the more longer tail analysis, figuring out, what events are people using, what are they buying the most, what's the LTV over certain periods of time. But a lot of times, the dev team will have their own tech stack. They'll use their own analytics tool, maybe internal BI. The marketing team will maybe use Adjust, some attribution tool. And these systems, a lot of times, are not linked together as much as they could be. And when you have an agency in the mix as well, you can imagine the agency is using their tools or they're using a tracking platform and they're not talking with the actual developer. And so, there's a lot of, people know about the beginning of the funnel and sort of like the longer tail, middle and end of the user lifecycle. But you don't necessarily know how those two pieces connect. And so definitely I think, the thing I'd recommend is definitely making sure you have sort of a data continuity and flow internally in the company as well. So not just sharing with agencies or sharing with networks, making sure all the teams internally are sharing.
Thank you. Interesting. So Yolanda and Chase, would you please share with us what kind of data do you guys look at internally when you run the UA, and what kind of data you guys are sharing with like tracking platform like Adjust, and also with the ad networks?
Okay, so it's really hard question to answer, what kind of data we are looking at when we run UA campaigns, because basically I would recommend everybody to look at everything that you could. Of course, with different priorities, because we're basically using Adjust to track, hundreds of data points. We're trying to segment the users based on, their channels and their behaviors, basically in-app. So of course, I believe everybody here, we have the experience of seeing, for example, retention rate as the starting point. But beyond that, are these users, what are these users doing after downloading our app, after opening our app for the first time, and which kind of function are they really using? Because if you're talking about global campaigns, or even just within Southeast Asia, different countries based on, for example, for our product, different countries based on a different infrastructure and different user habits, they might be ending up using different features, and they prefer to use a certain feature than another. So for this kind of data, it really helps us to define, number one, what's the quality of the user acquisition. Number two, what else we could do to further tailor the app towards this user's needs. So, well, that's that's for what kind of data we're looking at for UA campaigns, and what kind of data we are sharing. I just mentioned we are sharing with just a lot of data. Basically, we would like to segment based on the incoming channels. We would like to see what exactly each single step how they're using our app. And for ad networks, we are post-backing certain metrics as well that we care the most. And these metrics could change from time to time. For example, if we are caring about the retention at a certain time, it could be the potential for monetization for the next time. It could be something else, or I guess for games it could be whether you're finishing a certain level, right? So we are post-backing this specific data with the ad networks, and so they can help us further optimize the user acquisition campaigns that we're running.
Wow, you've pretty much covered a lot of things there. But yes, just to second what Yolanda said, I would say that basically because coming from two different verticals, particularly as well on the gaming side of things, with me and R2 Games, there's a lot of data and things that we really take a look into and take into consideration, particularly in terms of what we track at the moment. Of course, it really depends on the bandwidth of your team, and it depends on the kind of leverage you currently have in terms of using Adjust or in terms of using any tracking platform or solution that you have. But at the very least, on the gaming side of things, it is really important for me to be able to first vet how good the game is in the very onset of releasing the game. And so hence that's where retention rate comes in, particularly when, say, for example, you're soft launching a game and you want to find out how to optimize the game on a user experience perspective. When do they drop off? Is it on the first day 2 retention, like day 7, day 14, day 20 or day 30. Here you'll find out trends as to when within your game are the players starting to slowly disappear. This is where also we track most of custom events within Adjust, particularly in terms of level, in terms of the stage that they are in terms of their payment rates, and generally in terms of revenue. This is pretty much all tied together, not just within the app economy, but also in terms of like trying to fully understand initial player behavior when they onboard in your game. So just to answer that question, we track pretty much very similarly to what Yolanda tracks, but of course on a different perspective of the vertical. Volume, installs, the clicks, the conversion rates, of course, for us to really determine how good our user acquisition is or how terrible our user acquisition is. We also want to try to be very granular in terms of how we are tracking things. So we're not just only tracking things on an ad network level, but we're also tracking things on a campaign level and also on an ad set level or an ad level. And also, of course, we want to be able to create insights per country depending on which specific geos we are advertising at. And that's pretty much also the types of things that we share with Adjust as well. It's very important that when you're using a tracking platform that you maximize the type of interaction that you have with your MMP, because this is actually a gateway from having a failed user acquisition campaign to a successful one. And I think like data in general speaks for itself, and that in as much as you're tracking them, it's also important to learn how to fully analyze them, understand how it works for your game.
Thank you. So when you guys analyze the data, do you guys use Adjust dashboard a lot, or do you pull the data and using like internal system to analyze the data?
I guess I'll answer that first, but for R2 games, we do have a proprietary internal system where we pull all the data from Adjust and we post it back into our system. The good thing about that is because we are dealing with a lot of different developers and we're dealing with a lot of data points, it's easier for us to tailor the types of data that we want to see and data that we want to manipulate into our internal platform. But in terms of people within, say for example, the user acquisition team, they're mostly concerned on data that are initial, that are very close to their partners or to their ad networks. Hence, most of them use the Adjust platform or the platform first, and then move on to deeper analytics within our internal database backend.
Okay. Do you want to add something?
So for us, it's the same case. We are leveraging the API function from Adjust. So basically, the reason is that as we do have hundreds of data points, and it's all going to be shown on the dashboard. So for the easier processing purposes, we do have an internal system that we pull out the data or call back the data from Adjust platform, and then we segment and come up with different kind of reports in our internal system. Yeah.
Thank you. So Shawn, do you see any trend in terms of like what kind of data your clients are sharing with you and networks?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think definitely AppLovin and others are now using more post-install information to sort of optimize campaigns for performance networks. But also, I mean, definitely there's a huge uptick in retargeting. So for instance, using deep links to retarget existing users and re-engagement as well. It depends on the market. So in China, definitely just user growth, new user growth is the main thing. So there's not such huge amount of retargeting. It's mostly performance and some social. But for instance, in like Japan, Korea, more in the US, probably, we've seen like almost a doubling of re-engagement and retargeting. Because when you have a certain, limited number of audience who are going to play your game, like being able to really understand, what networks did, the juiciest users come from, and how do I get in touch with them again, one. And then two, having a platform, so maybe it's Adjust or your own BI tool, who can then segment those users, export their device IDs, and then push them back to retargeting platform to really retarget them again, ideally with dim links, is going to become really vital. So definitely, yeah, retargeting re-engagement.
So what kind of the KPI do advertisers check when they do retargeting?
Probably tutorial completion, lifetime value, retention rate. Though sometimes, interesting use case is being able to actually take in-app events. So for instance, maybe the user likes, this certain warrior character. So if I know that they like this warrior character and they've used this character a lot or they bought items for it in the game, then when I retarget them, I can make several variations, right, of my retargeting ad, warrior version, princess version, etc. And then when I retarget them, either maybe there's new warrior costume that came out or maybe there's just, I want to run a retargeting campaign. I can more directly speak to what I know their personal preferences are. And that's something you can really only do when you sort of combine your analytics together with the retargeting.
Okay, thank you. So Yolanda and Chase, so what are the important factors when you decide on the tracking partner? Do you have any or?
I start first. Okay. Okay. Deciding for tracking partner, I would say cost effectiveness would be number one criteria, or even the only criteria we are considering. So since I know that there are many solutions out there. It could be really pricey and they really take care of everything. It could be relatively cheaper that lacking the functions here and there, or what we would consider is if it's meeting our current need, and if by assigning one or two engineers to work together with either the API feature, either the callback feature, by assigning one or two headcount to work together with the platform, are we going to achieve what we would like to, especially in terms of the analytics, we care a lot about the fraud traffics. We do care about mapping the users acquired from each channel for us to identify which channel works better than another, or even which creative is working better than another. So it's basically adding up the resources internally and externally, what is best meeting our need.
And I guess just to add to what Yolanda said, just because pretty much everything that she mentioned encompasses a lot of why you should decide on a specific MMP or a tracking partner. I guess you look at it in several different angles within your organization in terms of who's going to be using the specific platform and what are the things that you want to get from that platform. Let's say on the engineering side of things, what kind of criteria are you looking at for a specific tracking platform? What kind of SDK? Is it a lightweight SDK? Is it something that requires a lot of jumps and hoops for you to be able to integrate that? Then you move on to, let's say, your marketing within the user acquisition side of things as well. Are all the bells and whistles there? Are there the basic functions, data integrity? Are they all included in that specific platform? Of course, it does take a lot of due diligence on your side to really pull through on a specific tracking platform of your choice. But at the same time, you also have to also realize that the most important part of the solution is not just the requirements that you currently have, but rather also the kind of service that they provide. Just to give you an example, when we started off with our tracking solution in the past, we've laid out, of course, the usual suspects, obviously. We tried to look at the pros and the cons of each of these tracking platforms and ultimately decide on several different situations. As Yolanda mentioned, cost effectiveness. How useful will it be on our user acquisition side of things? In terms of support from our engineer, which ones of those tracking platforms is easiest to deal with, right? Putting this all together, we've come up with a decision, and at this point, it's something that we're still using in terms of the platform that we're dealing with. So yeah, I would say focus more on what works for you, and also at the same time focus on what is the priority, because there will always be trade-offs at some point. But if your priority is user acquisition, then focus on what kinds of feature these tracking platforms can provide, from custom events to fraud detection or fraud prevention, to the kinds of analytics that it could provide you, to even the dashboard. If, say, for example, your organization is on a smaller scale and that you don't have the capacity to create a proprietary platform just yet. So all of these things must be taken into consideration to come up with a more informed choice of the tracking platform.
Okay, thank you. So you just mentioned about fraud, and I mean, as a network, we try to detect fraud and we stop serving. But how do you handle about like fraud traffic as a tracking platformer and also on advertisers?
Yeah, that's a good question. So fraud definitely, I think as everyone knows, has become a huge issue. Not just fraudulent purchases for hacked or jailbroken phones, but just fraudulent installs, right, which is resulting in like huge numbers of excessive CPI. So I think there's some studies saying there's $1 billion, in lost marketing funds due to fraud last year. It may be double or more this year. So as an attribution partner, analytics tool, so why are we dealing with fraud? Well, you think about what attribution is, right? It's sort of a clearinghouse. It's sort of a central point of truth saying this user came from this network, or this user is an organic user. And so it's sort of a natural extension of that to add fraud functionality as well, as that sort of just becomes another source, if you can think of it that way. So this user is from, say, AppLovin, this user is organic, this user is fraudulent user. So how do we detect that? It's kind of one thing that some people have their own systems that they use to detect fraud. In the case of Adjust, we actually have several sort of automatic features to detect fraudulent users and figure out which installs are bogus. The first one is we call IP filtering. So you can look at what IP addresses are those installs coming from. And this is something that you guys, that developers I think can do themselves as well to a certain extent. So obviously a lot of fraudulent installs are going to come from data centers where there's sort of racks of emulators trying to sort of spoof installs. Not just installs, but actually in-game events. Finish tutorial automatically, maybe do some actions automatically. So knowing that this user came from a data center, maybe some known cloud center somewhere, is going to be a first step saying, okay, maybe this is fraudulent. Same is true with VPN. So users may be VPNing into a high CPI region to try and get a higher CPI, also big red flag. So obviously the first step is sort of blocking all of these data centers, VPN, proxies, et cetera. The second one is looking at things like the statistics on click time to install. So basically, another type of fraud, in addition to sort of the data centers and the emulators, is something that's called click spamming. So what this means is that there's sort of a black market for device IDs. So certain networks or certain groups of users will basically purchase huge numbers of device IDs and then essentially send fake clicks out to attributions or out to networks, saying this user clicked on this ad even though they actually didn't. Second way is for fingerprinting, so obviously used for attributing users. You can obviously spoof fingerprints as well, just sort of make up millions or tens of millions of just sort of random user agents or user device strings and send those out as fake clicks as well. So when you do that, there's sort of some random chance that's going to match with an install. So the user actually didn't click on an ad, he installed organically, but those fake clicks match that. So what we can do to sort of prevent this is look at the average time from click to install. So for a real person, an actual user, you see this nice graph where after the first hour, so for games, first hour, around 90% of people will install after clicking. After 2 hours, 95%, and then another 5% over the next few days after that. Though for the case of these like fake clicks, there's no actual user that clicked on an ad. So it's just random chance that the user is going to match. So in that case, the distribution from click time to install is just going to be flat. There's always a certain fixed random chance every hour that a certain number of clicks are going to match. So we can automatically detect this sort of distribution, either on a network basis or on an app basis, and use that as another sort of key point to sort of automatically detecting that fraud. Yeah, so I mean, either way, I mean, you can use adjust, which has sort of those functions built in. Some people will roll their own system, but either way, definitely over the next year, especially in gaming, if you're going to be doing international promotions, figuring out some way to combat fraud and make sure that your users are real, I think is going to be really vital.
Thank you. Do you guys have any comments?
Yeah, I guess it's a very insightful what's been mentioned about fraud generally. On I would say like on experience on a gaming perspective, we did encounter a lot of like fraudulent instances as well, especially say for example bot farms. I mean like they all come in shapes and sizes, and to the uninitiated, it's really difficult for you to be able to actually detect that. But at the same time, just by looking at the data that you track within your tracking partners, you would already see red flags in terms of like the kinds of installs that's going into your game. It is important to have something which we call a fraud prevention rather than I would say a fraud detection, which I mean like at some point they've already made a payout to whoever it is that they need to pay out, and at this, you have to make financial adjustments on your end. So it's really good to have a feature wherein even before things happen, it's already being prevented. But if for whatever reason things happen in your end, very basic stuff, you may look at your, say, the amount of installs that's coming into you, the volume, and also the kind of retention that you're getting from those specific installs. Let's say, for example, you're working with a channel, and that channel promises you a CPI of a certain extent, right? But when these installs starts pouring in, you'd see a very, very small amount of, or a very, 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 very small retention rate. Usually a day 2 retention rate, you've already benchmarked your product in terms of like, oh, okay, day 2, it's at this specific retention rate. But anytime that the quality of installs is really, really low, it could come from somewhere that is either incentivized or, at even worse, something that's fraudulent. And so like you have to look at the logs and you have to go through a tedious process of identifying each of these installs just to make sure that they are from a legitimate source as well. So fraud prevention, as Shawn mentioned, is something that I mean as an advertiser also I'm trying to look forward to as well and use, because at the very least it eliminates that extra legwork of trying to sort things out financially as well as in terms of like trying to prove that this install, specific groups of installs are fraudulent.
Thank you. Do you have anything?
Yeah, for us, anti-fraud is rather an ongoing process for the entire ecosystem. Since as the anti-fraud technology improves, the fraud technology improves as well. So what we are doing, pretty much similar with what Shawn and Chase introduced. I'm just going to share from a utility app developer's perspective. So number one, of course, mind all the unique identifiers of the devices. It could be IP, it could be Google AD ID, it could be other identifiers that you guys are recording. You could find a pattern inside, as Shawn was introducing. This could help you actually filter out a lot of fraud traffic. And number two, mind your in-app user behavior. Like from a certain channel, is 90% of the new users finishing even a tutorial, or is just 30% of people are finishing tutorial? Are these new users clicking anywhere in your app? Or actually, nowadays, this could be faked as well. They could just randomly click anywhere. So a very important part, I would say, is to really look into your data. Try to find the warning signs, try to find the red flags, and take action, as soon as possible. And most importantly, if you could have a partner who really moves at the same speed with you to help you identify fraud traffics, that would be really recommendable. Yeah.
Thank you. So the last question from me. When you decided to share the data with Adjust or other networks, did you see any concerns internally, and how did you explain to your executives?
I'd say working for, Chinese culture in general, game developers in general, it's really different in terms of data sharing. There is a lot of pushbacks generally, especially in terms of like what kind of data you can share to your tracking partner, or what kinds of data you can share to ad networks. I see more of an openness in terms of data sharing with tracking partners, but more of a resistance in terms of sharing these specific amounts of data to the networks that you're working with. It is really imperative that we come up with a really good partnership with whatever specific network we're working with, whether that's big ones to small ones, right? But I think like a primary source of concern for Chinese developers generally would be more of leverage, especially say for example if somebody is trying, because like we have partners where we can optimize on the return of ad spend, right? It's easy for us to be able to actually just say, all right, partner number one, we want at least 30% of our ad spend come back to us in 7 days or 20 days or 30 days. So the KPIs that you basically put forward with your partner is something that's mutually agreeable, right? And obviously, like good partners understand that you have KPIs to meet as well. But for them to be able to achieve that, you have to be able to share a certain amount of data, whether that's retention data, whether that's revenue data, or whether that's payment events or revenue events or retention events or whatnot, right? The biggest issue at the moment is that a lot of them are still very uncomfortable in terms of like, if we're giving out these sets of data to our ad network partners or to our advertising partners, are we losing that much leverage in terms of how much CPI we can pay for a specific install, for example? And I think that is like the old way of thinking. And I think like China in general and developers in general are realizing that we have to be able to optimize on a certain level that's fast for us to be able to reach those pockets of installs that are really revenue generating, for example. Some 2 years back, when I was doing user acquisition, revenue for example, is something that I do not share with my ad networks. We just tell, hey, ad network, your campaign 3215 is doing great. Continue on, right? Or your campaign 3215 is terrible. Cut it, right? We at some point we share retention data, but that's just about it. And realizing that it's really performance based, I think that it is really important to share as much data as you can, as long as you have forged great partnership with the specific networks, with the specific partners. And then don't hold back on data that you think can be leveraged against you.
Thank you.
Yeah, for us, yes, we are in general reluctant to share data with third-party tracking or with ad networks, which is also widely existed, this kind of mindset in this part of the world. But I guess the question is more towards to what extent you would like to share data and at a certain stage of your business. So to what extent, as Chase was mentioning, probably for basic acquisition data, for example, retention rate, and the second day, and even it could be running all the way until 30 days, 90 days, you could share because this is a key metric, how you measure the user acquisition campaigns, how you measure the quality of them. And for the other things you would like to share with the ad networks, it could be some key metrics that really matters to your product. So for games, it could be ROI, and for us, it could be a certain usage point, or whether the users tend to share Wi-Fi hotspot with our platform. So for this kind of data, when sharing with ad networks, you don't really have to tell them, hey, this metrics is our revenue. I would like you to optimize towards ROI of 20. it could be just an app token, just an app event token, and you can let them know that, hey, for this certain ratio that we come out with, I would like this number to be above 0.35 or below 0.2. It could be in a way that the ad network knows where to optimize towards and help you save a lot of time, effort, and resources in optimizing campaigns by yourself. And the second question is, so I mentioned to what extent you should share your data, and the second one is at a certain stage. So taking into consideration that what kind of resources you're having internally, do you have a really powerful engineering team which has 20 people, which can take care of all the tracking functions that a third party could do for you or a professional ad network could do for you? So if, let's say, the bandwidth of your company, the resources of your company is limited, it's hard to hire, then consider to leverage the party and leverage the power of partners to reach the goal together.
Thank you. So that's all questions for me, and let's take some questions. Is there anybody who wants to ask them, like tracking partner, as an advertiser, or as a network?
So yeah, so we hear a lot about performance metrics, such as how does this KPI perform right now in this country and whatnot. How would you, I'll say, give best practices for everyone here on how to improve those performance metrics? So that could be like retention, but also session length, session comeback, or variability.
So for us, so like they said, we are getting postbacks for post-install events, so that if we, as a network, we have lots of placements. So one source it has much higher quality, and one source it's lower quality. So if we find higher quality, we are bidding up to drive more volume, and then if we find like lower sources, we gonna bid down to adjust their goals. I mean the performance. That way we do that automatically in real time, and that way we can maximize the volume, and at the same time we are maintaining the advertisers' goal campaigns.
Yeah, I guess adding a little bit to that. So it's hard maybe to change your user's play style. So for instance, you're not going to necessarily make a low LTV user become a high LTV user. So I guess to improve the metrics, it might be more important to figure out what media or what regions or what types of users are high LTV users first, and then sort of increase your ad spend towards those users. You can also sort of do it the other way, though, is for instance, if you know that maybe casual users come in through this particular media source or this particular campaign, if you have sort of a data sharing within your team, like we were talking about before, and you can sort of take that marketing data that these users came from this marketing source, and you can share it to the dev team, and they can use that as an input to sort of optimize the user experience. So maybe add more tips throughout the game, or maybe lower the difficulty level, because we know that this person statistically is probably going to be maybe a more casual user. You can take that sort of first funnel attribution information and push it forward and use that throughout the user experience.
Just to add on another point is that sometimes I would not recommend that we're trying to meet all the KPIs at the same time, because sometimes the product do have limitations, or it is just not possible for you to expect a user who brings $20 revenue and they're also doing this and they're also doing that, they're bringing everything that we want. It's a perfect user that we're looking at. So I would say internally we also try to look for the correct KPIs that we should be looking at.
And what those will be, like correct KPI? Because obviously what I've heard many times is, oh, let's track everything. That doesn't work, right? So what would be those correct KPI?
For us, for example, for our app, there are different priorities that we're looking at different timings. For example, when first launched in a certain country, we care the most is, for example, the retention rate. And after that, we would like users to be active. Say, for example, use for at least 2 or 3 times a week. And then after that, it could be potential of monetization. It could be changing a long time.
All right, so in Asia, we used to say it was mobile first, but now, of course, like PC is super powerful. So conversion is happening from tablets to PC toward mobile. So what's your expertise on that?
Yes, that's something. So we are having our own ID to connect the user device ID and cookies, but I think we rely more on the tracking platform on that front.
Yeah, at the case of Adjust, right now we're very much mobile focused, so not really doing PC attribution at the moment, mostly focusing on the tablet as well as handsets. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, we rely, because at the end of the day, if you want to do multi-device tracking, you need something outside of the device information to track that user. So you need some sort of a login. So maybe you can use the Wi-Fi master key login, you can use Facebook login. You need some sort of a login to track those users across multiple devices. And so we provide an API that allows the user to get device information, and then on their database, on their side, it's usually on the actual BI system of the client is where the multi-device tracking happens. So probably, Chase and Yolanda might have some more.
Yeah, just to add into that, I guess, on mobile-centric companies generally, as far as advertising is concerned, we focus more on being able to deliver the ad collaterals within specific kinds of devices, particularly within mobile in general. So iPads, iPhones, Android tablets, Android phones generally. So while there is on an organic side of things, like when somebody, say for example, tries to look for an app and decides to like download that app on his computer, which of course gets synced into his device, that's also happening. But most of the time on the advertising perspective, just to stretch your advertising dollar, you have to be mindful of what kinds of targeting you want to focus on, and mostly for mobile games or for mobile apps, I suppose, would mostly be focusing on targeting it on users that are browsing through their phones or their their iPads or their tablets. So the crossover mostly happens when it's an organic kind of install.
Got it. And obviously, like the ads on PC and elsewhere is a lot cheaper than on mobile. So that said, now it's getting more popular to make ads with deep linking. So for people that doesn't know, is that you can click on the ad, it will install the app, and then you go deeper in the app than what you're supposed to do, like the first introduction or whatnot. So is it something that you're seeing a lot or that you have experienced yourself?
On our end, we try to really focus on a lot of different things as well. Particularly deep linking is one thing, all right? But I think that in terms of being able to really leverage on our strength on mobile, because like say for example with R2 Games, we do have two business units. We publish browser games, so we still do a lot of user acquisition on the PC side of things, and we do a lot of user acquisition on the mobile side of things. The crossover doesn't normally happen, but when it does, of course, we do try as much as possible to deep link, to have more user insights, and for us to be able to actually delve deeper into the kind of acquisition that we do.
Yeah, I guess just to add on that too. So yeah, definitely deep linking has been used for quite a while for re-engagement, re-attribution. To say, hey, we see that you bought this ad, we bought this character's goods, we have some more that just came out, click on here and you can go right to that place. But definitely for EC, e-commerce recently too, I mean, definitely for performance, we've seen a lot of deep link usage. The tricky thing about deep links recently is that now there's so many different types of deep links. There's the URL scheme deep links for Android. There's universal deep links now for iOS 9 and then became mandatory in iOS 9.2. And so managing all of these different types of deep links for all the different devices can become difficult sometimes. So one of the advantages of using, I would say, a tracking tool is that we can automatically convert the deep links. So for instance, you just provide us with one deep link in one format, and we can automatically detect the device type, the iOS type, and convert that deep link into whatever version is going to be compatible with that device. So it makes it a lot easier for you to manage your deep link usage.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you, guys.